The protagonist had devoted his entire life to serving the Empire, dreaming only of one day returning to his homeland. Yet in the end, he was betrayed and cast aside. Through a mysterious artifact, however, he was granted a second chance, reborn as an infant into a noble family. Determined to take revenge, he vowed to use his former knowledge and newfound powers as a necromancer to rise again. Quickly recognized as a prodigy, he began his new journey to reclaim everything he had lost. The story then shifts to Earth in the year 2025. Amid a devastating war between humanity and monstrous creatures, a soldier lies mortally wounded on the battlefield. As a towering beast closes in for the kill, Commander Han Seong, the supreme leader of Earth's final defense force, intervenes, saving the man at the last moment. Han Seong engages the monster in a fierce battle, dodging its relentless strikes and countering with precise attacks that slice through its tentacles. He orders the wounded soldier to get back up and fight, and the man obeys, rejoining the struggle amid waves of monstrous enemies that have plagued humanity for decades. Believing victory is near, Han Seong charges toward the last remaining monster, but just as he prepares to strike, a brilliant golden magic circle materializes in front of him. Before he can react, chains of light wrap around his body, pulling him away from the battlefield. Disoriented, Han Seong finds himself in an unfamiliar chamber, facing an elderly magician who marvels at the success of his summoning ritual. The sorcerer hails him as a hero from another world and implores him to defeat the Demon King to save their empire. Han Seong reacts with anger and disbelief, demanding to know where he is, and insisting he has no time for such delusions. He is a soldier from Korea, not some fantasy hero. The magician silences him abruptly, activating a magical covenant known as Ga. Agonizing pain shoots through Han Seong's body, forcing him to scream in torment. The magician coldly remarks that if the hero had obeyed when asked kindly, the spell would not have caused him pain. As the suffering subsides, Han Seong glares in fury, thinking bitterly that he had never been asked kindly at all. The old mage repeats his command, to slay the Demon King and save the Empire, as a gleaming sword materializes at Han Seong's feet, marking the beginning of his unwanted destiny. The magician promised Han Seong that if he fulfilled their request and defeated the Demon King, they might return him to his world. Left with no real choice, Han Seong reluctantly agreed. Thus began his new life in a foreign empire, where he was forced to fight as their summoned hero. He waged countless battles, leading endless suppression campaigns, cutting down enemies day after day to serve the Empire's will. Years passed, 3, then 5, then 10. As Han Seong continued his bloody crusade against the Demon King's army, he sacrificed his youth and humanity to fulfill his mission, dreaming each night of the day he would finally go home. At last, he slew the Demon King, Baylor, believing his long nightmare was over. Yet his victory brought no freedom. The same old magician appeared once again, handing him a new mission. Furious, Han Seong protested, declaring that their deal had been fulfilled. But the magician coldly replied that saving the Empire did not end with killing the Demon King. He claimed that rebels opposing the Empire's unification must also be purged, and that there was one last threat left for Han Seong to eliminate, a warrior named Battle, from the Teutonia Night Nation. The magician spoke with deceitful kindness, asking Han Seong to help them just a little longer. Realizing he was nothing but a chained dog, Han Seong accepted with bitter resignation. The scene shifted to the burning nation of Teutonia, where Han Seong fought once more, wondering when his servitude would finally end. In a fierce duel against Battle, he managed to stab his opponent through the chest. Battle called him naive, and Han Seong, his heart heavy, admitted he had no other choice. Apologizing to his foe, he listened as Battle, recognizing him as the hero from another world, told him not to feel remorse, because he too would soon be discarded. With those final words, Battle fell. Believing the ordeal was finally over, Han Seong prepared to return. But before he could take a step, Count Brandenburg appeared behind him, congratulating him on his success. Without warning, the Count thrust his sword through Han Seong's back. Shocked and bleeding, Han Seong turned to face his betrayer, recognizing him instantly. Brandenburg, with a mocking smile, praised Han Seong for his service as the Empire's loyal commander, remarking that it was rare to find a hunting dog so obedient. Han Seong, racked with pain, cursed him and realized the promise of returning home had been a lie all along. Brandenburg declared that there was no point in keeping a dog that might one day bite its master and bid Han Seong farewell. As the hero collapsed, he thought bitterly that he had always known they would never release him. In his final moments, he cursed the Empire and swore that one day it would pay for its betrayal. As his life faded, the gem of resurrection embedded in his chest began to glow. Han Seong vowed never to forget the humiliation he suffered, and that the Empire would one day fall by his hand. That same night, while his body perished, a new life began elsewhere, inside a noble household where a duchess rejoiced at the birth of her son Dale. The duchess gazed lovingly at the newborn in her arms and softly told him that she was his mother. The infant Han Seong, reborn, looked up at her and then at the man standing beside her, sensing an uncanny familiarity. In the next moment, recognition struck. The man was none other than Duke Jackson, the Empire's most powerful necromancer and master of dark magic. With that realization, Han Seong understood where he was. Necropolis, the Empire's capital of black magic, specifically within the tower that governed it. The resurrection stone he had hidden long ago had worked. That single-use artifact, concealed during his tie as the Empire's chained hunting dog, had granted him a new life. Fate had chosen to make him the eldest son of one of the Empire's highest-ranking noble families. The infant smirked inwardly, realizing he had been born into privilege. Secretly, he vowed that once he mastered necromancy, he would destroy the corrupt empire that betrayed him. Duke Jackson soon noticed something unusual. Baby was not crying. Concerned, the Duchess asked the nurse to examine him. The nurse remarked that it was strange indeed, for the child's breathing was clear and strong. Inside, the infant Dale, Han Seong's new identity, scoffed silently, thinking that of course he would not cry, and wondering if they had any idea how old his mind truly was. The nurse reassured the Duchess that the baby was healthy, but added that if they were really worried, a quick slap would make him cry. Before Dale could protest, the nurse struck him gently across the cheek, leaving him furious and letting out muffled, indignant sounds. Duke Jackson chuckled that his son was stubborn, and the Duchess agreed, smiling that he must have inherited that trait. She then requested to hold the baby herself. Inwardly fuming, Dale thought they were all fools, and mentally shouted that their son was perfectly fine. Yet when his mother took him into her arms and brushed his cheek softly, he froze. The warmth of her touch stirred something long buried within him. He suddenly remembered the emptiness of his past life. Years of cold solitude, loyalty repaid with betrayal, and the complete absence of tenderness. That gentle caress shattered his composure. For the first time in his two lives, Han Seong, now Dale cried, tears flowing freely as his heart remembered what warmth felt like. 8 years passed. The Duke and Duchess conversed in their chamber, remarking on how quickly time had flown. The Duchess asked if Dale was still in the study, observing that he had been absorbed in books since the age of 4. The Duke laughed, saying their son must take after her. Then, in a more serious tone, he mentioned that Dale showed a deep interest in magic. The Duchess reminded him of his promise not to teach the boy necromancy, and the Duke nodded, assuring her that he remembered. As they spoke, Dale was shown reading alone in the vast library, his eyes sharp and intent, already far more aware of his destiny than anyone around him could imagine. The Duke reassured his wife not to worry, and changed the subject to discuss a birthday present for Dale, whose 8th birthday was the following day. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door. A maid rushed in, panicked, shouting that something strange was happening to the young master in the study. Alarmed, the Duke and Duchess ran to the library, calling out for Dale. When they arrived, they found their son kneeling on the floor, surrounded by a swirling aura of brilliant blue mana. Shocked, they called his name. The Duchess rushed forward, embracing him in fear and asking if he was hurt, but Dale quickly reassured her that he was fine. The Duke, standing silently for a moment, could feel the immense power in the air and marveled at what he was witnessing. For a child who had just turned 8, to generate this level of mana was extraordinary. He called to his son and asked seriously whether he had released the mana himself. Inside, Dale froze, realizing he had made a mistake. He hadn't meant to release his mana, and if he said the wrong thing, they might grow suspicious of who he truly was. Before he could think of an excuse, the Duke smiled and patted his head proudly, saying, "This is my boy." Then, with a note of regret, he added that it was a shame he could not teach Dale necromancy. Dale's expression darkened. The realization that his father would never pass down the art of necromancy struck him hard. He began to worry about how he would fulfill his vow of revenge without that knowledge. The Duchess gently told Dale to return to his room, promising that the servants would clean the library. As he left, the Duke turned to his wife Elena and smiled, saying that he had just thought of the perfect gift for their son. The next evening, a lavish birthday banquet filled the ducal mansion. Nobles from every corner of the Black Duke's territory attended, their voices echoing through the grand hall. Many whispered in admiration about the scale of the celebration and wondered when the young heir would make his appearance. On the second floor, Dale sat apart from the crowd, gazing down at the bustling ballroom with boredom. The endless noise and chatter exhausted him. Having lived a previous life as a weapon of war, he still found it strange to be treated as a noble child. His thoughts wandered to the incident in the study a few days earlier, and the desk he had destroyed when his mana had gone out of control. It had happened simply because he was thinking about his past life as the Empire's hero. He also remembered the mysterious biography of the hero he had found, and wondered who had left it there. Despite his father's prohibition, he could not abandon the idea of learning necromancy. His talent and lineage were too exceptional to ignore. He briefly considered asking to study necromancy as his birthday gift, but quickly dismissed the idea. With his parents watching him so closely, it would be impossible. As he sat lost in thought, his mother, Duchess Elena, appeared beside him, her gentle voice breaking through his gloom. She smiled and told him that he had waited long enough and that it was time for him to join his guests below. Dale greeted his mother politely, and she smiled warmly, wishing him a happy 8th birthday. As he thanked her, he noticed a graceful figure standing behind him and curiously asked who the guest was. His mother encouraged him to go and greet the visitor, then introduced her formally. The guest was Ms. Sebia, an elf and one of the elders of the Blue Magic Tower, renowned across the Empire as the Wise Spirit. and a master of water elemental magic. The Duchess proudly announced that Ms. Sebia would be Dale's new instructor. Dale was momentarily stunned as the elf stepped forward with a gentle smile, saying she looked forward to working with him. His mother repeated her birthday wishes, clearly delighted. Inside, Dale quickly analyzed the situation. A teacher from the Blue Magic Tower meant only one thing. His parents had no intention of allowing him to study dark magic. Water elemental magic emphasized protection and suppression, exactly the opposite of necromancy. It was now certain that his mother was determined to keep him far from the dark arts. Later that evening, Miss Sebia asked to speak with Dale privately, and he agreed. Once alone, she told him frankly that her role was to teach him only water magic. Her perceptive gaze caught him off guard as she asked whether he was disappointed, guessing that he desired to learn something else. Dale was surprised by her insight. Miss Sebia smiled faintly and explained that it was perfectly natural for the son of the Black Duke to be curious about necromancy. She continued, saying that the Duke's marriage to Lady Elelena was sealed by a solemn vow. Duke had promised never to pass down his dark craft to their children. Sebia spoke of that day long ago when the black magicians of the Empire attended the wedding dressed entirely in white instead of their traditional black robes, a symbolic gesture to honor the Duchess's wish. This union had been founded on that promise, and thus for now, learning necromancy was impossible. Still, she assured him that in Nye she would try to persuade Lady Elelena to reconsider. Until then, she urged Dale to follow her teachings and master the water element. Intrigued, Dale asked her a question in return. As an elf devoted to the natural order, didn't she consider black magic and necromancy, raising the dead, to be vile acts against nature? Sebia smiled thoughtfully and countered with a question of her own. Then what of the holy priests, she asked, who also bring back the dead with their divine power? Is that not equally against the will of nature? Her response left Dale speechless. She concluded calmly that in her eyes necromancy and resurrection were two sides of the same act. Dale realized she was unlike any elf he had heard of, open-minded, insightful, and unafraid to question dogma. For the first time, he thought she might actually become a worthy mentor. Sebia then suggested they begin their first lesson. She mentioned that she had heard he had already formed fragments of a mana circle, and explained that their first objective would be to expand those fragments into a complete mana circle. Dale eagerly agreed, recognizing this as the foundation required in every magical text he had studied. Sebia instructed him to place his hand over his heart and focus. As Dale began to concentrate, she spoke softly, explaining that unlike Earth, this world was saturated with mana, an invisible force flowing through every living thing. Sebia explained that in this world, all ancient beings such as dragons were capable of manipulating raw, unfiltered mana. Ordinary humans lacked that natural affinity, which was why they required a mana circle, a formation located within the heart, to filter and refine raw energy into usable magical power. She concluded the first lesson by describing the process in detail. Dale needed to gather the scattered fragments of his mana circle around his heart, connect them into a complete ring, and then rotate it steadily to stabilize the flow. Dale listened attentively and quickly understood that the circle was essentially an engraving of a monoflow pathway, carved upon the heart. Sebia instructed him to begin slowly, practicing the gentle rotation of mana within himself. She reminded him that most students needed at least a month to succeed, and advised him not to rush. Before she could continue, Dale interrupted hesitantly, saying he thought he had already done it. Startled, Sebia stared at him in disbelief. It was unthinkable for a beginner, especially an 8-year-old, to complete a mana circle within minutes. Such a feat was possible only for those blessed with a heaven-sent talent. Regaining her composure, she asked him to release some of his magical energy through the newly formed circle. As she waited, she reflected that even gifted children usually struggle just to channel mana properly. Meanwhile, Dale, carrying the consciousness of Han Xiang, thought coldly that this level of power was nowhere near enough to challenge the Empire or surpass Duke Jackson. Memories of his past life as a battle-hardened hero resurfaced. Once wielded deadly combat magic through seals engraved on his body. Yet this life was different. His new vessel, the heir of the Black Magic Tower's master, seemed to absorb mana as naturally as breathing. A new idea began to take root in his mind. Perhaps he could master other types of magic beyond water. He focused his mana, guiding it from his heart through his arm to his fingertips, visualizing the ultimate weapon shard that would one day destroy the Empire. He shaped the energy into a solid form. To Sebia's astonishment, the mana condensed into a crystalline projectile, a nearly perfect ice bolt. She whispered to herself that this should have been impossible. Spells of that complexity usually collapsed under their own instability when condensed and released. Assuming it would lack destructive power, she watched as Dale aimed and cast the spell. The ice bolt struck a nearby tree, exploding with a deafening impact that reduced it to splinters. Sebia's eyes widened in disbelief. The ice was so dense and sharp it pierced the trunk cleanly before shattering it entirely. No ordinary child could have achieved such precision, let alone produced a spell of that magnitude. Dale turned toward her with a disarmingly innocent smile and asked softly if he had done something wrong. Sebia stood speechless, utterly shaken, realizing that the boy before her had not only circulated mana and released power, but had also instinctively fused it with elemental energy. Though it was a basic spell, he had executed it with flawless control, drawing on the natural cold in the air to amplify its strength. In that moment, Sabia could only stare at him in awe, silently questioning who, or what, this extraordinary child truly was. Sabia stood silently, still trying to process what she had just witnessed. The intricacy of the magic formula Dale had used was far beyond anything an innocent child could have produced by accident. Upon careful observation, she realized he had unconsciously applied 3 advanced formulas: rotation, acceleration, and compression, collectively known among battle mages as the golden ratio of military magic. The mere fact that he had executed such a refined and lethal spell instinctively was nothing short of astounding. When Dale called out to her, concerned by her silence, she quickly composed herself and replied that it was nothing. Yet deep down, she understood now why Duke Jackson, the infamous Black Archmage, carried such deep regret. His son's gift was extraordinary, but also terrifying. Later that evening, Sabia met with the Duke to deliver her report. He listened intently, eyebrows raised when she began by saying she could not teach Dale. Surprised, he questioned her reasoning, arguing that if his son had achieved the formation of the first mana circle within minutes, that should be all the more reason to nurture his potential. Sabia, however, shook her head gravely and explained that the moment Dale completed his first circle, he immediately cast a flawless combat spell designed purely for slaughter. The Duke froze, visibly shocked. Sabia continued, her tone calm but serious, say it was almost impossible to believe that an 8-year-old could construct a perfect military-grade formula, a technique known as the golden ratio. Concluding her report, she stated plainly that the young master possessed a natural talent for killing. The Duke leaned back and thought, his expression darkening. After a moment, he asked carefully whether Sabia was implying that she would refuse to teach Dale, given up position as an Elder of the Blue Tower, an institution known for opposes destructive magic. Sabia denied it at once. On the contrary, she explained, it was precisely because of this that she wished to guide him personally. A child born with such power needed direction, not suppression. The Duke studied her closely, then admitted there was no reason to refuse her proposal. Sabia nodded and continued, adding that during her lessons she had sensed Dale's fascination with his father's forbidden art. The Duke looked startled, but Sabia pressed on. She had heard the tale of the Black Mage's love, how the Duke had sworn to Lady Elelena never to pass down the dark arts to their children. She respected that vow deeply, yet she spoke with conviction when she added that such a promise did not give him the right to decide his son's future. With talent of this magnitude, she argued, denying Dale his true path would not protect him. It would only stunt the potential of a child born once in an era. From the top of the stairs, Dale crouched quietly, eavesdropping on the conversation below. He frowned in frustration, unable to make sense of their words but certain they were talking about him. Remembering the immense power of his first spell, he thought to himself how even Lady Sabia of the Blue Tower had been visibly astonished. Letting out a sigh, he decided he would have to be more cautious when using his power from now on. His thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice calling, "Young Lord Dale?" He quickly got up from the floor, grinning with excitement. The voice belonged to a man clad in armor. "Uncle Helmet!" Dale shouted happily, asking why he was here and where he had been all this time. With a hearty laugh, the knight explained that he had been fulfilling his duty of protecting Meducha. He had been busy sweeping through dangerous dungeons and exterminating monsters. Lifting Dale into his arms, Helmet smiled proudly. Dale returned the smile, immediately understanding that his uncle had been on a dungeon-conquering campaign. In his thoughts, Dale reflected that dungeon appearances, or monster floods, were major crises in this world, disasters that could devastate entire provinces. Ever since the fall of the Demon King, such threats had persisted. Monster attacks often caused enormous damage to settlements, which made dungeon subjugation the knight's most critical duty. Their primary task was to clear the remaining strongholds of the Demon King's former domain, and to suppress outbreaks before they reached nearby towns. He also noted grimly that the situation in the Duchy of Saxon was far worse than most, and that he himself was indirectly responsible. In his past life as Han Xiang, after defeating the Demon King, the Empire had granted the Duke of Saxon dominion over the Demon King's ruined territories, ordering him to reclaim and purify those lands. In truth, it had been a political maneuver, a way for the Empire to dump its dirtiest work onto others under the guise of reward. Back in the present, Dale looked at his uncle with genuine concern and told him not to get hurt. Helmet was touched by the young lord's words, smiling warmly at his kindness. At that moment, Duke Jackson entered the hall. Dale immediately called out to his father, and Helmet bowed respectfully, receiving the Duke's thanks for his efforts on the campaign. Moments later, Duchess Elelena arrived, curious about the commotion. Dale wondered silently what she was doing there. The Duchess hurried to her son, eyes shining with pride. "I heard you reach the first circle," she exclaimed joyfully, fussing over him and praising his accomplishment as extraordinary. The Duke smiled too, congratulating his son, and telling him that if there was anything he wanted, he should not hesitate to ask. Dale hesitated, considering whether requesting permission to study necromancy would be too suspicious. Trying to think of a normal wish for an 8-year-old, he suddenly blurted out, "I want a little sister!" Both parents froze, faces turning red. The Duke cleared his throat awkwardly before replying, "I will try." Dale cheered enthusiastically, completely unaware of their embarrassment, or perhaps pretending not to. Outside the tower, Captain Helmet laughed uncontrollably after hearing about the young lord's unexpected request, while another knight begged him to stop laughing so loudly. That night, Dale lay in bed, exhausted from the day's events. Pretending to be an innocent child at his true mental age felt increasingly tiring. He wondered if his fatigue came from using magic earlier. Suddenly, a sharp burning pain shot through his body, and his surroundings darkened. In a vivid nightmare, he saw the figure of Count Brandenburg, his old betrayer, stepping out of the shadows. The man's voice echoed coldly through the darkness, greeting him with a sinister smile. "It's been a long time, Han Xiang." In the darkness of his nightmare, Count Brandenburg appeared before Han Xiang, his expression twisted with mockery. He called him weak and fickle, ridiculing how easily he had softened. With a sneer, Brandenburg taunted him, asking if he was happy now with his new life, loving parents, and a warm home. He implied that since Han Xiang's back was no longer cold and his stomach was full, he must have abandoned his thirst for vengeance. Then his grin grew darker as he warned that the Empire would find him. No matter how far he ran, they would hunt him down and erase every trace of his existence from the world. Dale woke with a start, gasping for breath as waves of mana erupted violently around him. Clutching his chest, he felt as if his heart were about to burst. The pain was unbearable. Realizing what was happening, he recognized the phenomenon as mana overflow, a condition he had only heard about. Cursing the Empire bitterly, he thought that in death, those damned Imperials refused to let him rest. Desperate for air, he staggered outside to the courtyard, hoping the cold night would steady him, but the pain only worsened. Suddenly, a voice called out behind him. It was Teacher Sebia. Seeing his condition, she quickly approached, remarking that he appeared to be suffering greatly. Her sharp gaze immediately identified the cause: mana overflow, a common occurrence among gifted magicians, though in Dale's case, something darker lingered beneath. As she reached out and placed her hand on his back, she could sense the dangerous turbulence within his magic, a presence steeped in resentment and hatred. If left unchecked, she thought, that darkness would one day consume him entirely. Focusing him mana, Sebia stabilized the chaotic energy within him until the violent surge subsided. Dale gasped as the pain faded, realizing that the overflow had vanished. "Teacher Sebia," he muttered weakly. She smiled reassuringly, and told him that the essence of magic is a reflection of one's heart. That was why the same spell could vary so greatly depending on who cast it. She explained that his magic, while extraordinarily powerful, carried an inherent affinity for taking life, a dangerous gift that must be carefully guided. Then she handed him a book. As Dale looked down and saw the black-bound tome, his eyes widened in shock. It was a necromancy spellbook. Sebia smiled gently and said that perhaps fate had brought her to him for this very reason. She wished him a happy birthday. Overwhelmed with emotion, Dale stepped forward and hugged her tightly. Sebia blinked in surprise before softening, patting his head affectionately and teasing him for still being such a spoiled child at his age. A few days later, Sebia took Dale to the open plains beyond the northern gate for further training. As they stood together, she pointed toward a rabbit grazing nearby. Dale confirmed he saw it, and Sebia told him to remember the hunting lessons he had once shared with his father. Taking a breath, Dale focused his mana and released a sharp ice spell. The rabbit froze instantly and fell lifeless to the ground. Sebia observed quietly, noting that despite taking a life, Dale's hands did not tremble. She called his name softly, reflecting that even when two mages used the same spell, their expression of it was never the same. Each magician's magic was a mirror of their heart. Turning to him, she asked if he understood why his hands remained steady after killing. Dale admitted he did not. Sebia smiled faintly and replied that magic, in its truest essence, reflects the mind of its wielder, revealing exactly what lies within their soul. Sebia continued her lesson calmly, explaining that magic was not merely the manipulation of energy but the manifestation of what resided in a caster's heart. Mana particles materialized the emotions, instincts, and intentions within the mind, which was why magic inevitably revealed the user's innermost thoughts. Dale listened in silence, absorbing every word. Sebia elaborated further, saying that even the names of spells, such as Firewall, existed only to anchor the caster's imagination, to give shape and clarity to their mental image. All forms of magic, she explained, regardless of their origin, followed the same fundamental principle. The Red Tower sought order through power, while the Blue Tower pursued order through harmony. The philosophy of each tower was reflected in the nature of its magic. She added that other towers, Black, White, and Green, each followed their own doctrines as well. Then, abruptly, she paused and smiled faintly, saying that this part of the lesson was still too early for him to understand. Dale blinked in confusion but nodded respectfully. Changing focus, Sebia moved to a new topic: the basic principles of necromancy. Using the corpse of the rabbit Dale had killed earlier, she began to demonstrate how mana could animate the dead. She explained that this form of magic revolved around channeling mana into a corpse, creating threads of control that connected the caster's will to the creature's body. Following her guidance, Dale concentrated, forming delicate strands of mana that attached to the rabbit's head, spine, and joints. The air pulsed faintly with energy as he stabilized the flow. Moments later, the lifeless rabbit stirred, glowing faintly with a purple aura as it rose to its feet. Sebia smiled in approval, praising his remarkable control. Encouraged, she asked him to attempt the next spell. Dale nodded confidently, focusing his mana once again. This time, he cast Frozen Armor, encasing the undead rabbit in a shimmering shell of ice. Sebia examined the result and commended him, remarking that the armor's shape was quite refined for a first attempt. To test its strength, she raised her own hand and launched a precise ice bolt at the rabbit. The projectile struck, and though the armor shattered under the impact, it had successfully absorbed the blow. Dale's eyes brightened with satisfaction at his success. Sebia praised him again, then noticed a flicker of eagerness in his expression. Curious, she asked if he had a request. Dale nodded enthusiastically, and with unmistakable excitement, asked if she would also teach him water element magic alongside necromancy. Her expression softened, but then she surprised him with a firm refusal. Dale froze, visibly shocked. Sebia explained patiently that what he had performed that day already involved the basic principles of water magic, its flow, adaptability and stability. To truly master it, however, required years of insight and mental discipline. She reminded him that even learning a single branch of magic demanded immense effort, and that the idea of mastering two elements simultaneously was far beyond what a child his age should attempt. Her words stung. Dale stood speechless, feeling the sting of disbelief. Ambition, she had called it. His desire to master both necromancy and water magic. Inside, he frowned bitterly, thinking how, despite everything he had shown her, spells, the control, the sheer power, she still regarded him as insufficient, as though he were merely an overreaching child rather than the soul of a man who had once faced gods and kings. Dale felt a sharp sting of disappointment as Sebia's refusal echoed in his mind. She had promised they would find a way together, yet now she dismissed his ambition as childish overreach. His excitement faded into quiet frustration. Seeing his downcast expression, Sebia gently ended the lesson for the day and told him to rest. That night, however, Dale could not accept defeat. Alone in the dimly lit study, he surrounded himself with open books and glowing runes of dark energy. Determined to prove he could master both arts on his own, he began to experiment, channeling mana through overlapping patterns of ice and shadow. The air shimmered faintly with the pulse of forbidden power as he worked through the night without rest. When morning came, Sebia greeted him as usual, but quickly noticed his pale face and weary eyes. "You look exhausted, Dale," she said softly. "Did you sleep at all?" He replied that he had stayed up a little late preparing something. Concerned, she reminded him not to overwork himself. Dale nodded with a polite smile, but his eyes still carried the quiet determination of someone who refused to yield. Later that day, on the snowy plains where they often trained, Dale revealed what he had been working on. He summoned a dark magic circle and merged it seamlessly with ice element magic, coating the undead rabbit in a new version of frozen armor, now reinforced with sharp crystalline spikes. Sebia observed with growing surprise as the young boy's spellwork glowed brilliantly. "You've completely mastered it," she murmured. Suddenly, the armor shattered violently, exploding outward in a storm of razor-edged ice shards. Sebia flinched back, momentarily stunned. "A frost explosion?" she whispered in disbelief. Yet voice she could react. The rabbit's corpse began to pulse with ominous purple light. A surge of dark energy erupted, triggering a second blast. A corpse explosion. The two spells intertwined mid-A, combining into a devastating wave of ice and darkness that tore through the field. Sebia raised a shield of mana, just in time as a storm of icy blades and black energy crashed around her. When the smoke cleared, Dale stood before her calmly, his clothes fluttering from the residual force of the blast. Holding an orb of blue light in one hand and a sphere of shadow in the other, he declared proudly, "I combined the corpse explosion with the frost explosion. In other words, I merged dark and water magic. Is this enough to be considered a dual magician?" Sebia stared at him in stunned silence. The entire plain was marked with deep cuts where shards of ice and bone had struck like blades. The destructive precision of the technique left her breathless. She analyzed the aftermath, realizing that the merging of frost and corpse explosions had multiplied the damage radius far beyond what either spell could achieve alone. It was a method clearly devised for battle, merciless, efficient, and born from experience. This child's heart, she thought with unease, is far too accustomed to killing. Before she could respond, Dale turned suddenly and waved. "Sir Helmet," he called out. The knight approached on horseback, smiling broadly beneath his armor. "Young Lord Dale, Miss Sebia," he greeted warmly. Dale ran toward him, asking eagerly if he had just returned from another dungeon expedition. Helmet laughed, explaining that this time it was only a minor monster subjugation, but that the Black Cavalry had faced some resistance. The Black Cavalry, Duke Saxon's elite knights, were famed across the continent for their unmatched might, and Helmet himself was one of the legendary Seven Swords. Dale's eyes shone with admiration. He reminded Helmet of his promise to teach him swordsmanship someday, insisting that no teacher could be better. The knight chuckled and replied that Dale was welcome any time. "Then I'll come see you soon," Dale said, beaming. Helmet nodded, advising him to head inside before he caught a chill and wishing him a safe return. After the training ended, Sebia suggested they return to the tower, and Dale agreed without argument. That night, the atmosphere within the ducal mansion grew tense. Duchess Elena and Duke Jackson sent for Miss Sebia, summoning her to discuss something urgent concerning their son. Sebia stood before the Duke and Duchess, speaking frankly. She reported that young Lord Dale had already mastered the first mana circle for both necromancy and water magic. The Duke's expression darkened immediately. He reminded her sharply that she had been instructed to teach the boy only water magic. Sebia acknowledged this but defended her decision, explaining that as a teacher, her duty was to nurture the student's curiosity and potential. Dale's desire, she said, was not limited to one discipline. Before the Duke could respond, Duchess Elena intervened. With calm resolve, she stated that since this was Dale's wish, they should allow him to continue learning water magic under Sebia's guidance. Sebia accepted the decision with a respectful nod, and both parents thanked her sincerely for her efforts. Before taking her leave, Sebia bowed deeply to the Duchess and apologized for unintentionally causing her to break her vow not to involve Dale in necromancy. After Sebia's departure, a heavy silence lingered between the Duke and Duchess. Elena sighed softly, admitting that their son was far from ordinary, a dual magician at just 8 years old. Though his power sometimes frightened her, she smiled faintly and said that such brilliance was precisely what made him their son. The Duke then called her name, his tone unusually solemn. To her surprise, he announced that he intended to teach Dale necromancy himself. He explained his reasoning with conviction. As a lord, he wanted his heir to possess the strength to shoulder the burdens of leadership. As a magician, he desired to guide such a rare prodigy, and as a father, he wished to pass down his legacy personally. Bowing his head, he apologized deeply for breaking his promise to her. Elena approached him with a gentle expression. She said she understood his decision. The world still viewed necromancy as a cursed art, a magic of death whispered about in fear. That was why she had once tried to forbid it. But now, she saw things differently. Placing a hand on his chest, she asked him not to suppress their son's destiny but to nurture it, so that Dale could become a necromancer strong enough to silence those who mocked or feared them. The Duke's eyes softened, moved by her words. He asked quietly if she truly meant it. Elena nodded and embraced him. "Ayu," she said, "make him strong." The Duke returned to embrace and vowed that he would dedicate everything, his power, his knowledge, even his life, to ensure that their son would become the greatest necromancer the Empire had ever seen. Days later, Dale found himself standing in the dimly lit depths of the castle's underground workshop, the infamous Black Duke's private chamber of magic. His father stood before him, arms crossed and expression stern. "I'm disappointed in you," the Duke said coldly. "You've been animating corpses all this time without even understanding what you were moving, haven't you?" Dale clenched his fists, thinking bitterly that Sebia had only taught him the basics. What else had his father expected? But before he could speak, the Duke continued, his voice firm. "From this day forward, as long as you train under B, you will forget every piece of primitive magic you've used. You will learn the foundation of necromancy, as it was meant to be understood." He gestured to the rows of skeletal diagrams and anatomical charts that lined the stone walls. "Your first lesson," he declared, "is to memorize the complete skeletal and muscular structure of every living creature. Only when you understand life in its entirety will you have the right to command death." Dale looked around at the grim workshop, bones, organs, and preserved bodies arranged like instruments of study, and realized that his true training as a necromancer had just begun. Dale sat buried under towering stacks of heavy tomes, responding to his father's every command with a weary but obedient, "Okay." The books were dense, filled with anatomical terminology and precise diagrams. As he studied them, Dale realized with astonishment that these were medical texts, so intricate that in his previous world, only professional doctors would have encountered such material. For several days he devoted himself completely to memorizing every line, every structure, every note on the human and beastly form. When he finally recited the content flawlessly, the Duke nodded in satisfaction. "Good, you've completed the foundation." Dale's heart leapt. He could hardly contain his excitement. At last he would learn real necromancy. The Duke's cold tone softened slightly as he said, "Then let the true lesson begin." They descended into the workshop, where a goblin's corpse lay motionless on the stone table. Dale stared at it in confusion, unsure what his father intended. The Duke noticed and smiled faintly. "A lesser magician," he began, "can animate the corpse of a swordmaster and still produce only a clumsy zombie. But a true necromancer, a master, can take the corpse of an ordinary soldier and forge a death knight." He gestured toward the goblin before them. "Right now, we have one undead soldier. Show me, Dale. How will you move it?" Dale took a breath and began the ritual, channeling mana into the corpse. He soon realized this was far more complex than animating a rabbit. The goblin's bipedal structure required precise control over numerous joints, bones, and tendons. Mana threads extended from his fingers like invisible strings, yet the body moved stiffly and awkwardly, twitching instead of walking. It felt like handling an uncooperative puppet. He frowned, realizing he might have overused rigor mortis enhancement, a spell that hardened flesh to improve defense. It had made the corpse too rigid to move properly. His mana trembled. He stood frozen, uncertain what to do next. The Duke stepped forward. "The concept was good," he said calmly. "Accelerating rigor mortis to strengthen the body is creative, but you focused only on power, not flexibility." Raising his hand, the Duke's dark aura flared. The corpse lifted instantly, moving with fluid precision as the Duke's mana surrounded it. "Observe," he said, pointing to the ribcage. These bones were meant to protect the viscera of the living. The dead have no organs to defend, so why preserve something useless? He closed his hand and the goblin's ribs cracked and twisted, transforming into curved bladed protrusions along its chest. Its fingers elongated into sharp claws. Dale watched, wide-eyed, as the lifeless form became a monstrous weapon. His father's voice echoed through the dim workshop. Necromancy is not about imitation, it is about transformation. You must understand the body's design, then reshape it according to your will. That is the essence of dark magic. In awe, Dale whispered, "Father," and then asked, "What is the philosophy the Black Tower follows?" The Duke's eyes hardened. "Truth," he answered simply. "Truth is found within death. Only by comprehending the weight of life can we reach that truth." He placed a firm hand on Dale's shoulder. The touch triggered a sudden rush of memories, flashes from his previous life as Han Seong. Flames surrounded him. A man knelt before him, trembling and begging for mercy, calling him a hero, pleading for his life. Han Seong's cold eyes had offered none. The blade fell without hesitation. The vision faded, and Dale shuddered violently, his face drained of color. The Duke noticed immediately and frowned. "Dale," he said, lowering his voice, "are you all right?" Dale nodded weakly, though his heart still pounded in his chest. The ghosts of his past, of the countless he had killed, were not as easily buried as the dead he commanded. Dale quickly shook his head, assuring his father that he was fine, though his pale face suggested otherwise. The narration explained that as Dale's magical ability continued to grow with each passing day, rumors began to spread across the empire. Word that Duke Saxon himself was personally teaching his son the forbidden art of black magic caused an uproar among the noble class. The revelation that the Duke had broken his marriage vow sent shockwaves through high society, and the young heir, Dale, became the subject of relentless scrutiny and whispered speculation. Every noble in the empire seemed to be watching him now. A few weeks later, the scene shifted to the duchy's training grounds, where Dale was engaged in a heated sword sparring session with his instructor, Sir Helmet. The clash of wooden swords echoed through the snow-covered courtyard. Despite Helmet's towering stature and experience, Dale moved with sharp precision, his strikes quick and fluid. In a sudden burst of motion, Dale disarmed Helmet completely, sending the knight's sword flying from his hand. Helmet blinked in surprise, then threw back his head and laughed heartily. "Impressive, young lord. That was an excellent move." Dale frowned modestly and replied that there was no way a knight of Helmet's caliber could lose his weapon so easily. "You must be going easy on me," he accused. Helmet scoffed and shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. I used real swordsmanship, not a sparring trick. Anyone else would have fallen from just one strike. You're truly exceptional, young master." With a teasing smile, he added that it was a pity Dale was a magician, since magicians were always surrounded by guards and layers of protective spells. "You hardly need to train this hard with the sword. So Telly, why push yourself like this?" Dale glanced down at his hand, wrapped in fresh bandages from overtraining. Then he smiled faintly. "Of course I have a reason. It would be pathetic if the son of Duke Saxon relied only on guards and barriers to protect him. And besides," he added, raising his wooden sword, "it's an honor to train under one of the 7 swords of the continent. How could I possibly waste that opportunity?" Helmet roared with laughter, clearly moved by the boy's conviction. "Ha! If I had a son like you, I have no greater wish in life." Dale grinned, proud yet playful. "So, the day has finally come when I receive high praise from the great Sir Helmet." Their light-hearted exchange was interrupted by a gentle voice. "My, you two seem to be in high spirits." Turning toward the sound, Dale saw Duchess Elelena approaching across the snow. He immediately lowered his sword and bowed politely. "Mother, what brings you out here in the cold?" The Duchess smiled warmly. "I came to see how hard my son is working." "You've impressed everyone, Dale." Then her tone softened with excitement. "I also have some news to share, and it's about the birthday present you asked for." Dale blinked, puzzled, trying to recall what gift she meant. A brief flashback flickered in his mind. Him standing before his parents weeks earlier, blurting out his innocent wish with childlike enthusiasm. "I want a little sister." His eyes widened in realization as he turned back to his mother, who only smiled knowingly, her hand resting gently on his stomach. Dale is stunned when he hears the news. His mother smiles warmly and tells him that he'll have to look after his little sister from now on. Dale, overflowing with excitement, promises loudly that he absolutely will. 10 months later, he's shown gazing down at his newborn sibling. His mother asks if she amazes him, and he answers yes, astonished by how tiny she is. He gently touches her cheek, admitting he still can't believe this little baby is his sister, and calling it incredible. His mother asks if he wants to hold her, and Dale hesitates, suddenly nervous. She encourages him to shy away, and the Duke adds that it's not difficult. He found it quite easy when he held her. Dale finally lifts his baby sister into his arms. His mother asks what he thinks, say the baby looks just like him. Duchess Elena remarks in surprise that the baby cried non-stop when her father held her, yet she hasn't made a single sound in Dale's arms, even smiling peacefully. The Duke asks his son how it feels to hold his little sister. Dale replies that although she weighs almost nothing, he feels a tremendous heaviness. His father tells him that this feeling is the weight of life, and instructs him never to forget it. The Duchess reminds Dale that it's time for his lesson, and that Miss Sebia is waiting. The scene shifts to a snowy field. where Sebia tells Dale that today's lesson will be a practical sparring session. Dale asks nervously if he's really supposed to attack her, and Sebia urges him not to hesitate and to give it everything he has. Dale agrees and begins forming a magic circle. Sebia prepares herself as well, eager to see how much he's grown. Dale starts the duel by firing a large ice bolt at his instructor. Sebia catches it effortlessly with her hand and crushes it, calling it far too slow for a first move. She mocks him casually as she holds a leftover shard, while Dale stares in disbelief. Suddenly Sebia hurls the shard back at him with force, yelling at him to raise his barrier. The shard slams into the ground and explodes at Dale's position. Dale gets up from the snow, realizing that without his last-second shield, he would have been seriously hurt. Sebia watches him with admiration, impressed he managed to cast the ice shield spell in that tiny window of time. She praises him, and tells him to come at her again. Dale focuses and activates a new formula, Ice Wall. Placing his palms on the ground, he commands the ice to rise. Sebia is caught off guard, wondering why he's using a defensive spell like Ice Wall in the middle of combat. She then notices the dense structure. Dale has reinforced the molecular bonds of the ice, making it nearly as strong as steel. She keeps wondering why he chose a defensive move, assume he might need a moment after her last attack. But behind the wall, Dale is already setting up another spell, Ice Explosion, the fragmentation technique. Dale gives the order, and the wall detonates. The massive ice structure erupts outward, and Sebia realizes with alarm that the explosion was deliberately crafted to scatter ice fragments in every direction, putting her directly in the path of the blast. Dale cheers at the success of his spell, analyzing what he just cast, a composite technique made by creating an extremely dense ice barrier, compressing it even further, and then layering explosive magic onto it. By reinforcing the ice on a molecular level before compressing it, he had essentially transformed the entire wall into a giant grenade. Confidently watching the smoke rise, he believes this time even his teacher won't be able to escape unscathed. He spots a silhouette forming inside the haze, and calls out with concern, until he sees Sebia frozen solid, and then breaking apart into pieces. Horrified, Dale shouts her name, but the real Sebia appears calmly behind the shattered figure with a smile, asking if he was looking for her. Dale stands speechless as he realizes what had exploded was only an illusion. Sebia praises his remarkable skill just as a thin cut appears on her cheek from the attack. She admits she never imagined that a First Circle mage could injure an elder from the towers. Dale panics and apologizes, insisting he didn't intend to harm her. Sebia assures him she knows that, adding that in fact she is grateful for the wound, leaving Dale completely puzzled. She explains that this injury shows he trusted her enough to reveal his full strength. Sebia kneels down, declaring that as his instructor, nothing could make her happier. Dale asks if she truly means it, and she answers immediately, calling him her exceptional student. She pats his head and marvels at how he managed to create such a spell. Dale replies that it was only possible thanks to her teachings. He then falls quiet as he notices Sebia drifting into deep thought. Later, the Duke asks Miss Sebia about the cut on her cheek. She tells him it was a result of her own carelessness during a lesson with the young lord, praising the astonishing sharpness of his magic. The Duke comments that he constantly feels indebted to her, but Sebia insists that instructing someone so gifted is a pleasure. The Duke then seizes the chance to request another favor. She tells him to go ahead. The Duke explains that they've received reports of a band of orcs crossing the mountains and entering their territory. Although the intrusion is minor and a small night squad could handle it, he has decided that Dale will take part in the battle. Sebia immediately objects, saying the young lord isn't ready for such danger. The Duke clarifies that he isn't expecting him to perform heroically, but as a member of the Saxon family responsible for protecting the land, Dale must begin learning his duty as the eldest son. While Sebia worries over the situation, the Duke adds that he intends to grant Dale his personal artifact, and asks it to guide him, so he can learn to wield its Lydian safely. It is explained that the artifact possesses immense power and intent, and can be activated through the sacrifice of either life force or mana. The greater the power, the more dangerous and difficult it becomes to wield, and in the worst cases it can even result in death. The Duke explains that the Saxon family has mastered and controlled such powers for generations. The scene shifts to the front of the castle's artifact armory, where the Duke asks Dale, as the eldest son, whether he shouldn't begin preparing for the coming battle. Dale is shocked at first when he hears the word battle, but excitement quickly follows as he realizes he will finally have the chance to fight. The Duke confirms that Dale will join the subjugation force tasked with eliminating the invading orc horde. Opening the armory door, he tells Dale that before anything else, he must learn to control the dark power inherited by the Saxon family. Dale is awestruck as he enters the massive armory filled with artifacts. His father explains that these relics originate from the Demon Lord's domain and are under their stewardship. They are heirlooms seized during the reclamation of that domain, since their ancestors' time, and must never be compared to ordinary magical items. Dale can feel the overwhelming energy radiating from them. The Duke stresses that each one is dangerous, and warns his son not to recklessly touch anything before he learns proper control. But as he finishes speaking, he turns and realizes Dale has vanished. Wondering where his son went, the Duke looks around. Dale had already wandered deep inside, thinking he must find an artifact that suits him. Suddenly, he hears a voice calling out from one of the relics, saying it senses the hatred inside him, that he desires vengeance. More artifacts join in, urging him to choose them so they can annihilate his enemies together, while another mocks him as a coward and demands he wear it so they can tear everything apart. Dale realizes that these dark artifacts are reacting to the grudges he still harbors, but he rejects all of them internally, believing none of them are enough and that he needs something far stronger. He stops when he notices a cloak beside him, wondering how long it has been there. Recognizing it instantly, Dale realizes it is the Cloak of Shadow. He immediately remembers it as a high-level artifact once used by Duke Berta, the Demon King's army commander he had faced in his past life. The cloak possessed the ability to manipulate shadows, make its user incredibly difficult to fight. Thrilled, Dale decides he has to wear it immediately, but his father calls out to him in alarm. Dale ignores the warning and puts it on. The moment he does, his consciousness is dragged into a pitch-black space where a voice echoes through him, screaming over and over, "I'm hungry." Outside, the Duke observes, stating that the process has begun. He notes that this shadow is no ordinary entity. In the past, users of the cloak had summoned raging storms of shadow and controlled them like living creatures. But to command the shadow beast, the wielder must subjugate it completely. Within his consciousness, Dale faces the manifesting shadow creature, realizing that overpowering it will be anything but simple. Outside, the Duke and teacher Sebia anxiously watched the enormous sphere of shadow swallowing Dale. Sebia voiced her worry, say far too much tide had passed already, and the Duke warned that if the delay continued, Dale's mind would collapse and he would be consumed entirely by the shadow entity. Sebia was horrified, and the Duke decided they had no option left but to intervene and pull him out by force. But before they could act, the shadows suddenly scattered, and Dale emerged calmly wearing the cloak. His father called out to him, and Dale answered without panic. Sebia rushed over, deeply shaken, but Dale reassured her that he felt perfectly fine, just a tiny pricking sensation. The Duke could hardly believe it, stunned that Dale remained completely unharmed. He continued to marvel at how a child's body could withstand such a powerful artifact. But Dale interrupted them with a cheerful smile, asking his father if he could try on more of the artifacts. Both the Duke and Sebia were utterly shocked by his request. The Duke reluctantly agreed, and Dale thanked him with excitement. He continued exploring the artifacts in the armory for an entire day. A few days later, at the Duchy's training grounds, Sir Helmet noticed the cloak Dale was wearing and instantly recognized it, asking, "Isn't that the Cloak of Shadow?" Dale confirmed it. Helmet remarked that the artifact was notoriously hard to control and asked how Dale was managing. Dale answered that it barely bothered him, aside from a slight prickling. Helmet found this extremely unusual. Dale smiled and made up a playful excuse, say the cloak had probably been lonely and clung to him the moment it saw him, maybe because it wanted to be friends. Helmet laughed, say the young lord had a kind heart to see such a dangerous artifact as something longing for companionship. Dale thanked him as the shadow beast appeared under his foot, being forcefully restrained. Dale told Helmet he had a request, and Helmet replied he was willing to do anything the young lord desired. Dale asked for a real duel as combat practice. Helmet agreed eagerly, promising to give his best so as not to disappoint him. As they got ready to spar, Dale thought that choosing one of the 7 swords of the continent as a partner might have been excessive, given how overwhelming his presence alone felt. Helmet noticed his unease, and reassured him that he would only use basic swordsmanship without aura. Dale thought Helmet was going easy on him, believing a true knight should always fight with full spirit. He prepared to strike as shadows surged from the cloak, thinking to himself that the real purpose of this battle was to train in controlling the Cloak of Shadow under the disguise of sparring. The artifact's true worth depended on his ability to transform its shadows into powerful weapons. Seeing this practice as essential, Dale unleashed a barrage of shadow blades at Helmet. Helmet received the attack, and Dale was stunned when he saw Helmet break the shadow blades using sheer physical strength alone. Without even drawing on his aura, the power was terrifying. Helmet laughed, praising the young lord's performance, and then declared it was his turn to attack. Dale instantly leapt back to defend, but Helmet was taken aback when sharp shadow spikes burst from the ground, blocking his advance. Helmet admired the cloak's remarkable ability to set up ambushes like that. Helmet brought his sword crashing down onto Dale's shadow defenses, and Dale let out a strained groan under the sheer force of the blow. He managed to block Helmet's relentless follow-up strikes, but each impact pushed him farther back. Helmet stared in disbelief, wondering how Dale could possibly withstand his strikes blows strong enough to break normal swords with ease. He realized then that a high-level artifact truly was on another level. Fired up with excitement, Helmet shouted for Dale to keep going for 10 more rounds, and the two continued clashing fiercely. Later that day, when training ended, the ordinary knights who had been watching whispered among themselves in awe. They commented that none of them had ever lasted more than 2 rounds against Commander Helmet, and now there was an unbridgeable wall separating their abilities from Dale's. A few days afterward, on the morning of departure, Duchess Elena was still trembling with worry, telling Dale she couldn't bear sending him somewhere so dangerous. He tried to console her, reminding her that both his father and Sir Helmet would be at his side. She continued fretting about him possibly getting hurt. Dale faced her seriously, saying he had to grow stronger so he could carry the responsibility of the Duke's household in the future. Looking at his sleeping baby sister Liz, he added that he needed real experience now. so that one day he could protect her, his father, and her as well. He pleaded for her permission to become strong enough to protect his family. Elena was moved to tears and finally agreed, bidding him goodbye and urging him to be careful. Dale promised her he would return soon. At dawn, at the temporary base, Sir Helmet reported to the Duke that the troops were ready to move. The Duke asked Dale to give the order to march in his place. Dale was stunned, and his father explained that the Black Cavalry family's pride would one day be under his command. These soldiers, the Duke said, were already his knights. Dale realized these weren't his father's men, they were his, and that this would be his first true battle as Dale. Determined, he declared that the time for departure had come. Raising his fist, he addressed the troops, calling them the proud blades of House Saxon. The knights roared back that they would follow the young lord's command. Orders echoed across the camp as each unit prepared for movement. It was then explained that their force of 250 knights would rendezvous with the elite guard stationed in the White Mountains, known as the Winter Guards. The strategy was laid out. The orc horde numbered roughly 1,000. Driven by cold and hunger, the orcs had crossed the upper stream of the Saxon River, and would soon push toward the lower stream. Thus the Duke's forces planned to cross the lower stream first, and launch a surprise assault. Since a deep river couldn't be crossed quickly by 250 knights without magical aid, Teacher Sebia stepped forward, instructing everyone to clear the area, as she announced she would create an ice bridge. Dale thanks her sincerely, appreciating that she came to assist in battle despite her creed of peace and non-violence. Sebia conjures an enormous ice bridge across the river, and announces that the troops may cross. The Duke expresses his gratitude, and Sebia wishes him victory. Dale says his farewell, and rides off on horseback. She watches him leave with a gentle smile, thinking to herself that she has a student who makes his teacher worry far too much. Not long after, at the orcs' temporary encampment, the Winter Guard archers lie in ambush and unleash a barrage of flaming arrows. The explosive projectiles rain down on the orcs, sending the camp into chaos as fire erupts everywhere. One orc roars furiously in the blaze. Sir Helmet commands the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Knight battalions to advance in wedge formation. Riding beside Dale, he asks the young lord for his assessment. Dale evaluates the situation, noting that the horses are charging at roughly 40 kilometers order. With the combined weight of horse and rider, their acceleration becomes enormous. He concludes that a couched lance, 3 to 4 meters long, and reinforced with aura, cannot be stopped by orcs no matter how tough they are. The knights smash through the orc ranks with ease, and Dale observes that the battle is overwhelmingly one-sided. The Duke agrees, saying this is the true might of the duchy's forces. Helmet warns Dale not to relax yet, reminding him this is only the beginning. The clash between knights and orcs rages on. Helmet explains that although the ambush worked, it wasn't enough to wipe them out completely. The strategy now is to pull back, regroup, and finish them through repeated assaults. The retreat signal is given and the units begin withdrawing. As the knights fall back, the bewildered orcs hesitate. 2 orcs bellow, and one hurls a spear at a knight who is lagging behind. The spear hits the knight's arm and impales his horse's neck, sending both crashing down. Dale halts, staring at the fallen knight. Helmet remarks coldly that such misfortune is part of retreating. The Duke believes the knight's fate is sealed, stating that the army has suffered a loss. Dale wonders quietly if that means the knight is already dead. The Duke adds that a proud sword of House Saxon lies exposed to the enemy. Dale whips around sharply, unable to understand why everyone is simply watching. He spots an orc charging in to finish off the wounded knight. If he tries to ride down the slope, he'll arrive too late. Closing his eyes, Dale focuses intensely. He needs to pierce the orc's thick hide from this range. Orc skin is tougher than that of most monsters, so his current magic formula won't suffice. He decides to modify the Ice Bolt spell, adding a bullet-type formula for precise anti-personnel fire. To enhance it further, he integrates a sniper rifle formula to boost speed and penetration. He extends his hand and fires the newly crafted spell, Ice Bolt imbued with sniper rifle mechanics. The projectile shoots out instantly and punctures the orc's skull. The creature collapses dead. Watched from afar, Helmet notes in astonishment how accurate the shot was despite the long distance. Dale immediately urges his horse downhill. Helmet shouts after him, asking where he's going, but Duke Jackson stops him, ordering him to let Dale proceed, shocking Helmet. The Duke smiles, thinking that for Dale to create a unique formula at such a young age, and one with such deadly focus, his inner world must already be fully formed. Reaching the injured knight, Dale sees more orcs regrouping nearby. He identifies 2 immediate problems. First, the knight is panicking and unable to stand. Second, his unique spell formula is far too long to use effectively in close combat. He realizes he needs to shorten the formula, just as long mathematical equations are simplified. He thinks of a brief, coded name for it, something like Ice 90 Type Magnum. Dale decides that even Ice 90 Type Magnum is too long, and settles at a shorter name, Ice Bullet. At that moment, another orc charges toward the terrified knight. Dale fires the newly simplified spell, and the Ice Bullet punches cleanly through the orc's skull. The creature collapses right behind the downed knight, who stares at Dale in shock, wondering why the young lord would risk himself for him. Dale stands before him and tells him calmly not to worry. With a reassuring smile, he says that House Saxon never abandons a sword that proves its loyalty. The knight is so moved he can barely speak. The remaining orcs roar and rush forward. Dale prepares his next attack. Drawing on the Cloak of Shadow, he summons a swarm of shadow blades. He smiles and commands the shadows to consume them. One orc looks up in horror before the darkness falls upon them. The shadows shred the orcs apart, grinding them down until nothing but bones remain. Turning to the last surviving orc, Dale asks with a smile why he hasn't tried to flee. Then he fires another ice bullet, ending the creature instantly. With the danger gone, he remarks that everything's fine now. The wounded knight calls out to him, admitting that his legs won't move because of fear. Sir Helmet arrives with reinforcements just in time to see Dale carrying the injured knight on his back. Dale tells him he finally showed Dut, and that he'll leave the remaining orcs to him. Helmet immediately commands all battalions to charge at once. "For House Saxon," he roars, and the knights thunder forward, adding a new cheer in honor of the young Lord Dale. A short while later at the Saxon base, the Duke praises his son, telling him the orc subjugation has been successfully completed. Once the battle matters are settled, the Duke summons Dale privately to question him about the expedition. His expression turns stern as he demands the real reason Dale recklessly charged into enemy lines alone. Dale swallows hard, wondering why he's suddenly being scolded. The Duke repeats his question insistently. Dale reminds him of what he said earlier, that the Knights of House Saxon are the force Dale will one day command. Based on that, he believed his actions were appropriate. The Duke dismisses this reasoning as foolish. Dale is stunned. His father is known for caring deeply for his knights, so he can't understand why he's reacting like this now. Dale pushes back, asking why the Duke simply watched and allowed one of the duchy's knights to die. The Duke responds by explaining that the northern border of House Saxon, which faces the Demon King's territory, suffers endless monster attacks. Knights stationed there never expect anyone to come save them. Dale argues that even so, he wanted to save a knight who had shown loyalty to his father. The Duke counters with a heavy question. "Du mean, just as you did that day?" The Duke continues his lesson, explaining that knights must learn to fight and act independently if they want to survive on a battlefield. By stepping in the way Dale did, he made them believe someone else would always appear to save them. The Duke questions how many knights can survive with such a dependent mindset. He then clarifies his own role. He only intervenes when his knights face a threat beyond their ability to overcome. That burden, he says, is the noble duty the Saxon family must carry. Dale cannot respond. He realizes he overlooked a principle he himself, as Han Seong, had lived by in his previous life. Even so, as Dale stands firm in his resolve, the Duke softens. He smiles, sets a hand on his son's shoulder, and tells him that the way he acted on his conviction left a deep impression on him, something Dale must never forget. He then dismisses him, telling him to return to the castle. News spreads quickly. The Duke's young son charged alone into a horde of orcs to save a single knight. The story becomes sensational gossip throughout the Empire. Rumors wildly exaggerate the event. Some see claim the young master single-handedly exterminated 1,000 orcs. Described as 9 parts truth and 1 part embellishment, the tale spreads like wildfire. And although Dale finds it embarrassing, his actions spark a fresh wind of change within the duchy. A few days later, when Dale arrives at the knights' training grounds, all the knights greet him by kneeling. He blushes and asks them not to do that, but Sir Helmet urges him to stand tall. Helmet then addresses the knights, declaring that they must grow stronger for the future of their young master. The knights cheer loudly, pledging their loyalty. Dale remarks on how spirited they are. A maid named Eve approaches and informs him that the guests from House Erlart will be arriving soon. Dale thanks her and heads off to welcome them, thinking about the important visitors they will receive. It is revealed that the guests are from the warrior House Erlart, once a great noble family in the kingdom of Teutonia, led by the famed sword god Bartel. When the Empire launched its unification campaign, Teutonia fell, and with Bartel's death, the Erlart family collapsed. Back at the castle, Dale notices Sir Helmet deep in thought. He approaches him, guessing he must be thinking about the sword god man who inspired Helmet's path to knighthood. Helmet admits that it leaves a bitter taste in his mouth. The Duke sees Dale arriving on time and assumes he must have been training, which Dale confirms. At that moment, a servant announces the visitors, and the Duke orders that they treated with utmost respect. 2 women enter, Vanessa Erlart and her young daughter Charlotte. They bow politely. The Duke praises them for traveling without escorts. Vanessa introduces herself and greets the Duke humbly. He welcomes them graciously. She then introduces her daughter, Charlotte Erlart, but Charlotte mutters irritably, "Mother." Dale wonders about her odd reaction. Suddenly, Charlotte explodes, demanding why her mother is bowing to people like them. Vanessa panics and scolds her loudly. As she tries to silence her daughter, the Duke calmly intervenes, acknowledging that their journey must have been long and exhausting. He then asks Dale to escort Lady Charlotte around the castle. Dale accepts politely and offers his hand to guide her, but Charlotte slaps it away and screams at him not to touch her. Dale freezes in shock, while the Duke and Duchess, holding the baby, stand stunned. Charlotte scoffs, calling them arrogant imperial nobles. Vanessa, horrified, yells her daughter's name, and orders her to apologize to the young lord immediately. Charlotte brushes her off and storms out in anger, ignoring the calls behind her as Dale tells her to wait. The door slams shut, and Vanessa immediately bows her head, apologizing repeatedly for her daughter's behavior, explaining that Charlotte is not normally like this and is acting out due to a recent traumatic incident. Duchess Elena gently asks what happened, and Vanessa explains that Count Brandenburg, a holy knight, was recently appointed as an inspector over their territory. She says he is infamous not only as a holy swordmaster, but also for his grotesque nickname, the Pig King. Obsessed with producing an heir of exceptional talent, he targets gifted swordsmen and swordswomen alike, forcing himself upon them without hesitation, even when the girl has not yet reached adulthood. Vanessa confesses that they barely managed to flee before he could touch Charlotte, but the terror of that moment still haunts her daughter. As a disgraced noble, she admits she has no power to protect her child, and begs the Duke to allow Charlotte to serve as a maid under House Saxon, so that Brandenburg can never reach her again. Elsewhere, Dale finds Charlotte at the training grounds and wonders what brought her there. Guessing that the spirit of a knight runs in her blood, he asks if she even knows where she's headed, and she admits she doesn't. Hesitantly, she asks if the hand she slapped earlier is all right, and he calmly tells her it's fine and not to worry, which visibly relieves her. Dale notices traces of tears and realizes she is still shaken by what happened, understanding that beneath her sharp attitude, she is still only a child. Without warning, Charlotte turns, draws her sword, and declares that if that's the case, he must duel her, ordering Dale of Saxon to draw his blade. Stunned, Dale thinks to himself that she truly does whatever she wants as she insists on the duel. When he asks her reason, she explains she has heard countless rumors about him, claiming he single-handedly slaughtered 1,000 orcs and saved a fallen knight. Dale inwardly cringes at the exaggeration, knowing the truth is far less dramatic. Charlotte continues, declaring that by defeating the man said to be unrivaled across the empire, she will prove her strength to the world and show that she can protect her family from that man. Confused, Dale asks who she means, and when she names the swordmaster Count Brandenburg, his blood boils. Shocked, he recalls the same despicable bastard who once betrayed him, never expecting to hear that name here. Realizing their enemy is the same, Dale briefly considers that she could become an ally, but decides first she must learn how cruel reality truly is. As Charlotte watches in confusion, Dale turns away to grab a weapon and coldly tells her that she's just a child who knows nothing yet, then orders her to come at him with everything she has. Charlotte snaps back that she fully intends to do exactly that, then immediately charges forward, her rapier wrapped in a faint green aura as she thrusts at him, only for Dale to calmly intercept the strike with his blade. Their weapons clash again and again in rapid succession as Charlotte presses the attack relentlessly. Yet, Dale deflects every blow with effortless precision. As he parries, he carefully studies her movements, noticing that each time her strike is blocked, she twists her wrist to launch a swift follow-up, and that she uses only the bare minimum of aura. He realizes she is channeling aura simply to control a rapier that is oversized for her body, much like mages generate mana through circles, while knights exceed their limits by gathering aura within themselves. Blocking another attack, he reflects that blood truly does not lie, acknowledging her inherited talent. The exchange grows fiercer as Charlotte continues attacking, her confidence rising as she thinks that if this is all he can do, then she clearly has the advantage. Memories flood her mind of the father she never met, the stories her mother told her each night, and the promise that she must protect her family as the proud daughter of the sword god. She remembers how her blade never faltered, even as her homeland fell and her family crumbled, and frustration boils over as she wonders why every strike she throws is being stopped by this boy named Dale. Sensing something is wrong, she lunges again, but Dale executes a flawless parry that leaves her stunned, then instantly disarms her, sending her rapier flying as it clatters to the ground. Charlotte collapses to her knees, unable to understand how she, the daughter of the sword god, could lose. As Dale approaches, she looks up at him with tears streaming down her face, and he tells her plainly that the reason is simple. She is not the sword god. He explains that her pride as the sword God's daughter is not misplaced, but in her current state, she will never be able to protect her family from that man. He adds coldly that Count Brandenburg's blade is dozens of times stronger than even his own at present. Hearing this, Charlotte breaks down completely and asks what she is supposed to do. Standing before her, Dale declares that he, Dale of Saxon, will stake the name of the ducal house itself and become the guardian of the Erlart family. Shocked, Charlotte listens as he continues, saying that until the day she becomes strong enough to defeat Brandenburg, House Saxon will serve as her shield. When she asks why he would go that far, he answers that her sword and her talent are worth it, then demands that she swear herself as a blade to him and to House Saxon. A faint smile forms on Charlotte's face as she says she would never refuse such an offer, then kneels solemnly before him and swears, in the name of Charlotte Erlart, her oath upon her honor as a knight. Though it appears to be nothing more than a promise between two children, the resolve within it is strong enough to be called a true oath. Later that day in Duke Saxon's office, Dale informs his father that at Lady Vanessa Erlart's request, Charlotte has become a lady-in-waiting to the ducal family. The Duke remarks that Charlotte agreed without hesitation and asks what transpired between them, to which Dale responds that he made a promise in the name of House Saxon to protect the Erlart family. When the Duke questions whether he used the family name merely out of pity for her situation, Dale firmly denies it. The Duke asks what Dale hopes to gain from all of this, and Dale answers without hesitation that Charlotte is the sole surviving descendant of the Sword God, and, just as expected, her talent is extraordinary. He openly states that he secured an oath of loyalty from Miss Charlotte, and what he intends to gain is nothing less than a Sword God who will serve the interests of House Saxon. Hearing this, the Duke smiles with clear approval, impressed by the scale of his son's ambition. Dale, wearing a sly smile of his own, thinks to himself that having the last heir of the Sword God on his side is a powerful strike against that bastard Brandenburg. The scene then cuts to Malberg, the former capital of Teutonia, where Count Brandenburg erupts in fury, smashing furniture as he bellows in rage. He demands to know how they dared to make the first move, while a trembling subordinate kneels and apologizes. Brandenburg lashes out, calling them worthless idiots and questioning how they could fail to capture a single child. The subordinate hurriedly explains that assassins were dispatched, but they appear to have been killed before ever reaching Saxon territory, leading them to believe that Charlotte Erlart herself dealt with them. Brandenburg sneers and calls them incompetent trash before striding toward his holy sword, Durandal. Memories of the past surface as he gazes at the blade, addressing it as his beautiful bride and asking it to wait just a little longer, vowing that he will secure the perfect bloodline to wield it and claim everything he desires, no matter the cost. He orders the Thieves' Guild to be summoned and commands that someone be sent to the Duchy of Saxon, declaring that he will pay any price, even 1,000 gold coins, to have that brat Charlotte dragged before him. A week passes after Charlotte swears her oath of fealty, and she begins settling into life at the Duke's castle, quickly noticing how different it is from her home in Teutonia as she undergoes intense training as a lady-in-waiting. Daily sparring sessions with Dale become part of her routine, and Sir Helmet, who oversees their training, asks if they are prepared. Dale answers confidently that he is ready, and Charlotte firmly agrees. Helmet smiles and signals the start, and the two immediately clash as the training duel begins. Steel flashes as they exchange rapid strikes, and as the duel continues, Helmet watches closely, silently wondering if this can truly be called a fight between children. Though their level has yet to reach that of full-fledged knights, he senses an alarming speed and killing intent radiating from both of them. The duel escalates as Dale uses his cloak to disrupt Charlotte's vision, forcing her into a moment of pressure, yet she pushes through and launches a precise counterattack. At that instant, Helmet steps in, stopping Charlotte's blade and restraining Dale before he can retaliate. He praises their performance and tells Lady Charlotte she did well, but she brushes aside his praise and bluntly asks what she lacks. Helmet asks if she understands the true essence of the rapier, and when she answers that it is piercing, he immediately denies it, explaining that the real foundation lies in the legs, in footwork. He points out that Dale closed the distance and evaded her thrust simultaneously, and in that moment, she should have retreated, reset the distance, and searched for another opening. He further explains that the more forcefully one bends and extends the arm to drive a rapier, the more the blade vibrates, reducing accuracy and making clean thrust difficult. Helmet concludes that she must completely rebuild her basics. Charlotte bristles at his words, and Helmet adds that he already noticed her stance and footwork were awkward and inconsistent. She snaps back that it's because she never had a proper master to teach her, to which Helmet smiles and says that as long as he is around, he will personally correct her strange piercing form. Charlotte snaps angrily at his wording, and Helmet laughs, admitting he was only teasing her because she's adorable. Watching the exchange, Dale thinks to himself how fast Charlotte will grow under the guidance of Helmet, one of the 7 swords of the continent, and resolves to train even harder so she doesn't surpass him. Later, Dale turns his attention back to reviewing his magic training. Dale reflects that forming a mana circle follows the same principles every time, sensing the mana circulating near the heart, waiting for a stable pathway to emerge, and then engraving the shape of the magic ring. Yet the flaw in this method is that it normally takes decades to complete. During a lesson with his teacher Sabia, she is visibly shocked when Dale casually tells her that he has already finished constructing his second circle. In his mind, he explains that mana rotation speed in this world is measured in revolutions per minute, with most first circle mages averaging around 300 RPM, while his own first circle spins at roughly 2000 RPM and his second circle at about 400 RPM. Since the minimum speed required to expand to a new circle is 300 RPM, he realizes he already qualifies to attempt forming a third circle. Having reached this stage, Dale decides to run an experiment and improve his ice bullet spell, theorizing that reinforcing the projectile's molecular bonds would increase both its mass and durability, while pairing it with a large caliber barrel structure would boost rotational force and velocity. He casts the enhanced spell, armor-piercing ice bullet, and stares at the result in disbelief, wondering how firing something so powerful felt so effortless, quickly concluding that adding even a single additional circle drastically changes everything. Sabia praises him, remarking that he truly is a quick learner, just as she expected, and Dale humbly thanks her, insisting she deserves the credit. Sabia quietly recalls recent events, from his decisive rescue of a knight from the orcs to his encounter with Lady Charlotte, and concludes that Dale is a child who understands how to wield power responsibly. She admits to herself that while his talent is frightening, he always gives her reason to trust him, and as a student, she can genuinely be proud of. Overcome with emotion, Sabia suddenly hugs Dale, leaving him internally flustered as he awkwardly notes that the physical contact is unexpected and uncomfortable. Later that dawn in the castle courtyard, Dale finds himself overthinking the moment, briefly wondering whether she still only sees him as a child, before shaking his head and dismissing such thoughts as pointless distractions. At first light, he refocuses on training and begins by forming an ice wall, then tests a newly modified spell, Ice Bullet 12-gauge Buckshot, which obliterates the wall and sends ice pellets ricocheting in all directions, forcing him to raise a magic shield to block the scattered fragments. Smiling in satisfaction at the successful test, he muses about experimenting with slug rounds next time, only to be interrupted by a familiar voice. Charlotte has arrived to train as well, and when Dale asks if she is practicing, she confirms that she is working on the footwork Sir Helmet taught her. Dale remarks that she seems to be enjoying sword training, and Charlotte responds with shy hesitation before suddenly apologizing for her selfish behavior during their first meeting, admitting she regrets being rude to him. Dale jokes that it was more than mere rudeness, but he laughs it off, tells her he will make a special exception and forgive her, and asks her to stop being so formal around him. Charlotte visibly brightens and agrees, adding that she likes the cold climate of the region because it helps her cool down quickly even when training late, which makes Dale smile as he realizes he feels the same way. From a castle window, the Duke and Duchess Elena quietly watch the scene unfold, with the Duchess remarking that their son has truly grown up, and the Duke asking whether she thinks the two children suit each other, to which she replies that only time will tell, privately resolving to help her son be honest with his feeling. Later, on the outskirts of the duchy, Duchess Elena supervises relief efforts in the slums, as Dale reflects that his mother personally oversees the distribution of food and necessities every week, and that this year both he and Charlotte have joined her. During the visit, Charlotte notices a distressed young child who rushes toward her, pleading that his mother is in danger, grabbing her arm and begging for help. Dale and Charlotte follow the child, though Dale immediately feels uneasy, noticing that they are being led away from the accompanying knights into a narrow, winding alley, and finding it strange that the child sought help from Charlotte, rather than the adults. When Dale spots someone observing them from a rooftop, he realizes the child is affiliated with the Thieves Guild and becomes certain that Charlotte is the true target, though he cannot understand why the trap feels so blatantly obvious. The child abruptly stops, claims he is going to fetch his mother, and then sprints away. In that instant, masked figures close in around Dale and Charlotte, one of them sneering at the sight of nobles wandering into such a dangerous back alley, while another calmly explains that their business concerns the young maid Charlotte alone and advises Lord Dale to step aside. A third man twirls a dagger with a grin, warning that acting recklessly could cost him dearly. Dale steps forward without hesitation, declaring that he is Dale von Saxon and that he has sworn an oath to shield the young lady of House Erlart from scum like them. The green-haired leader laughs mockingly at such naive chivalry, remarking that Dale should have paid more attention to the time and place, adding that perhaps this encounter will teach him how cruel the world truly is. Charlotte whispers anxiously that she left her sword behind, but Dale quietly reassures her not to fear. In his thoughts, he recognizes this as the perfect chance to test the new abilities of his Cloak of Shadow under the guise of self-defense. The thieves rush in from every direction, intent on ending it swiftly, when one of them suddenly senses an unnatural wind as shadows begin to coil around them. The leader shouts sharply for his men to retreat, and Dale notes the man's quick judgment, assuming he must be a high-ranking operative, before launching his counterattack. Drawing on a technique gained after completing his second mana circle, Dale implants a shadow creature like a parasite into one of the attackers, who immediately screams in agony as the darkness burrows into him. The leader stares in horror, unable to comprehend what Dale has unleashed, as the infected man mutates into a twisted undead soldier that shrieks, "I'm hungry." Panicked, the leader orders his men to destroy the abomination, realizing too late that a single misstep could doom them all, and he throws himself into the fray, boasting that even 2 oracles gathered in this alley would fall before his glowing daggers. He strikes, only for Dale to block the assault effortlessly with his shadows and ready a response. Cursing under his breath, the leader is met with Dale's next spell, a double-barreled 12-gauge buckshot, as multiple magical shots erupt from his hand and slam into the man, hurling him backward. Charlotte watches in stunned silence as Dale stands unmoved at the center of the alley, while the undead shadow soldier savagely attacks another thief. Dale observes that the leader survived the initial blast, deducing that an aura-coated body must have softened the blow. And when the wounded man staggers back to his feet screaming that it is not over, Dale releases his shadows once more, slicing him in half before he can close the distance. The undead creature continues shrieking about its hunger as it tears through another body. When the fighting finally ends, Dale approaches Charlotte, who is seated on the ground, and calmly asks if she is hurt, to which she answers that she is not. He takes her hand as one remaining thief groans and attempts to crawl away, prompting Dale to fire an ice bullet into the man's foot to stop him. The last survivor pleads for mercy, offering to reveal everything he knows in exchange for his life, and when Dale confirms that he truly means everything, the thief desperately agrees. Dale prepares another spell, coldly remarking that he has little interest, and unleashes a magical explosion that silences the final voice. As Charlotte stands frozen in shock, Dale tells her that, what she witnessed is the feared face of the Duchy of Saxon, but also the strength that will keep her safe, and asks whether she is frightened. She admits she is a little afraid, yet quickly says it does not matter because he acted to protect her, reaffirming the vow she made that day, that if his family becomes the shield guarding hers, she will one day repay him by becoming a sword wielded in his name. She thanks him with heartfelt enthusiasm for showing her a future she never thought she could have, and vows that she will grow stronger no matter what, while he watches her quietly, realizing that his acceptance of Charlotte was not only about her talent, but also born from guilt he carried from the countless battles and lives he ended in his past life, making her decision to willingly become his sword far more meaningful than he ever expected. Meanwhile, within Count Brandenburg's castle, the enraged Count crushes a letter in his hand, cursing under his breath as he reads an invitation to Saxon Castle, a direct summons from the Black Duke himself demanding accountability for the attempted kidnapping incident. And Brandenburg knows that even as the Empire's holy sword, he has no choice but to comply. Several days later, Count Brandenburg arrives at Saxon Castle, where the Duke sits upon his throne with Dale standing calmly at his side, welcoming him and commenting on the hardship of his journey while apologizing for the modest reception, only for Brandenburg to reply with thinly veiled sarcasm that nothing takes priority over a summons from the Duke, all while seething internally and labeling Dale and Charlotte as sly little brats. The Duke continues coolly, stating that the Empire is deeply concerned about the recent daylight kidnapping attempt within Saxon territory, and that he assumes Brandenburg understands why he was summoned, prompting the Count to scoff inwardly at the notion that the Emperor's loyal sword could be tied to such a disgraceful affair. But as he speaks, a suffocating dark aura floods the hall, startling everyone present as shadows coil through the air, and one of the knights cries out in confusion about the sudden wind. Panic erupts as Brandenburg's knights are swallowed by the shadows one by one, screaming for help as they are effortlessly subdued, and Brandenburg finally understands that Duke Saxon has unleashed a high-level dark spell, Ryle's Tempest, overwhelming the Holy Magdalena Knight Order without resistance. The Duke addresses him coldly as the Sword of Sanctity, commanding him to kneel and remain still, and when Brandenburg protests in rage, the Duke asks calmly if he failed to hear the order, and warns that there will not be a second warning. Forced to his knees under crushing magical pressure, Brandenburg curses the humiliation in silence, never imagining the Black Duke would go this far, even with cause, while the Duke reminds him that the summoning was done in the name of peace, before issuing a chilling threat, swearing that if Brandenburg ever again dares to harm the children of House Saxon, he will personally slaughter every member of the Brandenburg family. Expressing sincere hope that this message is understood. Abruptly shifting tone, the Duke mockingly invites the shaken Count to warm himself, to which Brandenburg stiffly replies with forced gratitude, while stating he cannot remain due to circumstances, and with a dismissive farewell wishing him a safe journey, the Duke releases him. As Brandenburg departs, Dale observes in silence, fully aware that his father has just publicly crushed one of the Emperor's closest loyalists, and understands that this single act will become the spark that shakes the entire empire. Dale understands that it will all begin as a small spark, yet it will not take long before it grows into an uncontrollable flame, and he realizes that their role will ultimately be to sever the head of the so-called Sword of Sanctity. By the time rumors spread throughout the empire that the Sword of Sanctity had been forced to kneel before the Black Duke, the Duke himself was already standing inside his office alongside teacher Sabia, who looks visibly horrified as she stares at the bodies laid out before her. The Duke calmly explains that the corpses belong to members of the Thieves Guild who attempted to attack Dale, openly confirming that his son was responsible for their deaths. Sabia takes in the gruesome sight, one corpse with its entrails spilled, another crushed and riddled with holes, and for the first time she begins to question whether her teachings to Dale may have been flawed. The Duke tells her plainly that this is precisely why they need her wisdom to properly guide Dale's overwhelming talent, and formally offers her the position of chief advisor. Sabia is stunned, realizing this is not merely an invitation to continue teaching, but an offer to become a member of House Saxon itself. The Duke explains that Dale relies on her more than anyone else, and that guiding him is no longer something he can handle alone, insisting that everything will change if she accepts. After a moment of silence, Sabia agrees, stating that she understands, and acknowledging that understanding how Dale views the world has now become more important than ever. Time passes, and soon Dale's 10th birthday arrives, celebrated in a grand banquet hall filled with luxury. Yet this year feels different, as representatives of the Emperor's faction are present as well. Among them stands a particularly influential figure, the Marquis, who steps forward and greets the young Lord Dale with measured courtesy, expressing his pleasure at finally meeting him. Around them, the guests praise the exquisite food and the Duke's generosity, remarking that such extravagance in the northern lands is unbelievable, and admitting their previous doubts about the duchy's distance from the empire were unfounded. Dale watches silently, recognizing these guests as central nobles from the imperial capital, the core of the Emperor's faction, and the greatest power beneath the imperial throne, and he understands immediately why they are here. Their presence is an unspoken warning, a clear message that the imperial family will not overlook the humiliation inflicted upon Count Brandenburg, the Sword of Sanctity. Standing before him now is the very messenger meant to deliver that message, Marquis Marquet. The Marquis studies Dale with keen interest and remarks, "So this is the young Lord Dale," before introducing himself by his title, the Crimson Lord. Dale recalls exactly who this man is, the head of the Red Magic Tower, an organization devoted to fire, fury, and absolute order through power, whose mages follow the Empire's ruthless belief that might defines justice, and who never hesitated to act as tools for imperial ambition. Memories surface from Dale's past life, when he endured countless forced magical modifications at the hands of Red Tower mages, and his expression hardens. Marquez then addresses him again, stating that he has heard rumors of the ducal family's miracle genius, a child whose magical talent is said to be unrivaled throughout the entire empire. He continues by repeating the rumors that Dale, at only 9 years old, wiped out an entire horde of orcs to protect one of the family's knights, and concludes that he truly is the Duke's son, prompting Dale to offer a faint smile, thank him politely, and wish him an enjoyable time before walking away, while thinking how exhausting it is to receive birthday congratulations like this every year, wishing instead that he could be training with Charlotte, though her official status as a lady-in-waiting assisting his mother makes that impossible. And more importantly, realizing how dangerous it would be for the Sword God's daughter to be openly seen practicing swordsmanship. Suddenly, he hears a scream, followed by a man shouting at a maid to stay still. And as Dale traces the sound, he finds a fat party guest pinning a maid to the floor while she begs him to stop, reminding him that she serves House Saxon, only for the man to sneer and shout that a lowly maid has no right to invoke the Duke's name, complaining that it is the young lord's birthday and everyone should be enjoying themselves rather than wasting time, crudely declaring that playing with a girl is better entertainment and threatening to slaughter the maid Eve if she resists again. As he orders her to submit, Dale intervenes coldly, asking what he thinks he is doing, shocking the man when he recognizes the young lord and immediately tries to wriggle out of the situation, even mocking Dale by asking if he has ever enjoyed a woman and offering to teach him personally, while still gripping Eve and pressing a knife to her. Dale ignores the provocation, calmly reassures Eve that she does not need to worry, and that he will save her, thinking to himself that in a class-based society, this man would never expect a noble to strike an imperial guest, and using that hesitation to his advantage, he casts an ice spell that knocks the man to the ground, knowing he has no intention of backing down recklessly, but also aware that attacking an imperial representative carries consequences. The man scrambles back to his feet in rage, demanding an explanation, only for Dale to coldly order him to kneel, shouting the command again and demanding that he apologize to Miss Eve, clearly stating that she is a person of House Saxon. The man protests, insisting that he stands here on behalf of His Majesty the Emperor and that insulting him to protect a mere maid is unacceptable, but Dale cuts him off with a biting question, asking whether the Emperor has a hobby of raping other people's maids, leaving the man stunned and furious as he accuses Dale of daring to say such a thing. At that moment, Duke Saxon, Marquis Marquet, and the other guests arrive, with Marquet smiling and remarking that this is quite an interesting spectacle, while the Duke asks his son to explain the cause of the disturbance. Dale calmly states that the man named Pro attempted to assault a maid of House Saxon, prompting one noble to sarcastically ask if such contempt towards Sir Pro is justified over something so trivial, giving Pro the opening to complain loudly about the immature young lord, only for Dale to interrupt sharply by asking who allowed him to stand. Addressing the gathered guests, Dale explains that nobles from the imperial capital bear the duty of representing the emperor, yet this man sought to disgrace His Majesty by assaulting a maid, and for that reason he could not tolerate Sir Pro's behavior. Marquez bursts into laughter, praising the young lord's wit as a masterpiece and agreeing completely, mockingly asking how someone representing the emperor could dare to assault a mere maid, before summoning his attendant Tulara and casually ordering him to kill the insect called Pro. Pro is shocked and screams for help as Ulysses immediately launches a fire attack, burning him alive while he shrieks in agony. And Ulysses declares that the young lord's words are absolutely correct, and that it is his duty to burn insects who dare insult the imperial family and the empire, after which Marquez calmly concludes the incident by expressing his high expectations for young Lord Dale's future.